Good evening. I'm Linda Abshaw from the Brain Injury Association, Waterloo-Wellington. We have our guest speaker tonight, Lindsay Sproat, and I'll let her do a little bit of introduction as to what's happened to her and to how she is recovering in her journey of recovery. Anyone who wants to ask a question, please do so in the chat, and then we can pass those questions on to Holly, on to Lindsay, sorry. So take it away, Lindsay.
All right. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to tune in tonight. I'm excited to share my story. My name is Lindsay Sproat, and 5 years ago, I was in a traumatic car accident. I will share, I won't take that out. Oops, sorry. I'm going to share my presentation. So it's called And Then It Hit Me, and I just want to warn everyone that there are some graphic images, some of my car and some of my leg that you may feel is a little graphic. So just to pre-warn everyone. So, and then it hit me. Whoops. So life before the accident, I was a 27-year-old professional working full-time at Linamar in Guelph as an accountant and also studying for my CPA designation. I was living with my common law in Cambridge. We were together for 7 years and we loved to travel, and I spent a lot of time with friends. Even at that point, life was already a balancing act between work, school, other personal and social obligations, and it was a daily challenge, but little did I know that it was about to get even harder. So the day that changed my life forever. So November 3rd, 2015, I was going about my usual routine, and I decided at 5 o'clock, I normally started to study for my CPA. That night, 2 of my friends stayed with me to help me study for my upcoming exam, which was on the Friday, and this was a Tuesday night. We stayed until about 8:30, and then they said, okay, time to wrap it up. So wrapped it up, got ready to go home. My normal routine would be to text my boyfriend at the time and tell him that I was coming home. He told me that lunches were made, a nice glass of wine was poured, and to please be careful of the deer. Now, to me, I remember putting my phone away and just laughing to myself the whole way home, going, a deer? Of all things, like, come on, that's like 1 in a million chance. Little did I know that a deer was also the smallest thing that I had to worry about. The last thing that I remember was turning right onto the road, and then 2 weeks later, waking up from medically induced coma, being hooked up to a ventilator and all kinds of wires, just freaking out, not knowing who I was, what had happened to me, or what day it was. I thought it was all just a really bad dream. So later on, I found out the accident details. I found out that I was in a serious head-on collision, and the car that hit me was with 3 teenagers who were racing one another at 150 kilometers an hour in an 80 zone. It took the firefighters an hour and a half to remove me using the jaws of life. I was told that I had flatlined 3 times, but they successfully revived me, and they took me to the Kitchener-Waterloo Airport, where I was airlifted by the orange helicopter. The firefighters, police officers, and the paramedics that night were the first on scene, and they definitely had a pivotal role in saving my life that night. I was later told that I was only given about a 5 to 10% chance of even surviving. So it was truly a miracle that I'm even here. Now, this is the list of my injuries. I know it's pretty overwhelming. There's about 26, in fact. I remember looking at this and not even knowing what half the words mean. I mean, obviously, right, fracture, we know those. But for all the rest of them, I had to go home. I pulled out Google. I would translate the words I didn't understand and wrote it right above each word, so that basically I could read what it meant in English and determined how broken I truly was. The recovery begins. I was in the ICU and underwent 3 major surgeries varying from about 8 to 15 hours, none of which I remember at all. The surgeon called me Humpty Dumpty and said that he had to put me back together again as best as he could. I could not move in the bed at all as I had a neck brace on, I had a broken arm, I had 2 mangled legs that were put back together with hardwood and rods. I had multiple stitches and staples all over my body. They told my family that it was probably a good plan for them to find somewhere to rent downtown, as we'd probably be at the hospital for about 12 to 16 months. They also told me that I would never be able to walk again, let alone without a walking aid. So rehabilitation begins. This is where I went, Toronto Rehab. Despite what doctors told my family, I managed to get out of the hospital and making my actual hospital stay only a month, not 12 to 16. From there, I was taken to Toronto Rehabilitation Institute, where I stayed until February 28th. I was non-weight bearing on 3 limbs, and my everyday job at the hospital was focusing on relearning everything from simply rolling over to eating to dressing to eventually taking my first few steps with a walker. I had a whole rehab team as well that helped me at the hospital, from a doctor, a physiatrist, an RN, an RPN, a speech language pathologist, a social worker, a physiotherapist, an occupational therapist, and a massage therapist. So as you can see, this is just a little snapshot of what my 3 months at Toronto Rehab looked like. And it was extremely busy. But after a excruciating physiotherapy appointment where they pushed me every day to the point of tears, the highlight of my day was always my 3 to 4 o'clock, which was Ellen DeGeneres. She always seemed to be able to take me away from the reality of things and just lighten the mood. When I first arrived at Toronto Rehab, I was upset because I thought I was being taken home, not to another hospital. I remember the first day, I didn't want to talk to anyone or participate in anything rehab related at all. I remember my boyfriend came in and told me that I had to be nice to everyone, as they were just there to help me. And in order for them to help me, I needed to help myself first. It was then that I made a plan in my head. I'd do everything that they told me, and that would help me get the hell out of there quicker.
There's Lindsay and Amy.
This is my first time outside.
First fresh air in 3 weeks. It's a little nippy out here, but we're...
So the reality of it is that at the hospital, I had a ton of therapy. Normally, I'd like to think that my friends would agree that I was a very personable, happy, friendly, down-to-earth person. But at the hospital, I was angry, miserable, and easily agitated. This was supposed to be something fictional that you see happen in the movies or you read in a book, not something that happens to me. I was completely exhausted, and I slept every chance that I got, which is about 16 hours a day. The pain was excruciating, not to mention the stress on top of everything else. I just wanted to go home. Time to go home. So this was my outpatient rehab. When I was discharged from the rehab facility, I thought I was saying goodbye to my rehab team, and that outpatient rehab was on an as-needed basis. But man, was I wrong. In my head, I came up with another plan. I'd do what they told me from March to September, and then by September, I'd be done with this rehab thing forever and be back to my normal life and back to work. Little did I know, yet again, that I'd be here in 2020 telling you my story and telling you that I still am working with some of them today. Outpatient rehab consisted of a PSW, a case manager, physiotherapist, occupational therapist, social worker, massage therapist, rehab support worker, a dietitian, and a speech language pathologist. Probably the hardest struggle for me was fighting my own stigma. I gave my rehab team a really hard time with this. I wasn't always the most compliant patient either. I didn't want to be labeled with a disability. I wanted to live my life and act my age. So I constantly was pushing my own limits and participating in activities that I knew I shouldn't have. But the reality of it is that I didn't want to have to tell my friends no. And in my own head, I could still do everything. I resisted help from a lot of people during my recovery, just to realize that they all had my best interest at heart. I was constantly apologizing to everyone as well, who had to push me around in a wheelchair, as I felt that I was embarrassing them and a burden to them. When I got home, my occupational therapist suggested an accessibility pass. No way, was my first thought. I don't want people to see me getting out of the car and feeling sorry for me. Plus, as far as I was concerned, there was nothing wrong with me and I didn't need one. Then, during physio, my physiotherapist suggested a cane. Again, no way. That was for old people. That's something that my grandma uses to get around the house. But after much persuasion, I got one, and it was pink and full of flowers, the girliest one in the store. Then they suggested aquatherapy, which seemed like a good idea. I like to go swimming until I got to the pool. It was me, my rehab support worker, and all kinds of old people, my grandparents' age. But at the end of the day, they ended up being my biggest cheerleaders, even to this day when I still go. Then there were my scars. I was so embarrassed by them, so I ended up getting rid of all my dresses and skirts that I used to wear and decided to wear jeans and leggings even in the dead of summer. I easily got embarrassed by all the stares that I got every time I left the house. I had people ask me why I was limping or what was wrong with me. When I decided to go to school, my rehab team looked into accommodations. I didn't want to have to use those either, as I wanted to blend in with the other students. After all, I was already going to be the oldest student there. But to keep my rehab team quiet, I tried them out for my very first exam, and that was it. As a result, I pushed my limits time and time again, and it's been a real learning curve. I have had to accept my own limitations within my pain tolerance. It has been very difficult to accept and still push forward, and it's still something that I'm actually working on today. But I think my rehab team would agree that I'm slowly learning to accept my limitations now, and I pick and choose the activities that I participate in. I'm learning to listen to my body and rehab, so I'm not paying for my bad decisions and being in pain for days. So my new norm, my life as I knew it completely changed. On top of my hectic rehab schedule and getting better, my life as I knew it basically fell apart. My 7-year relationship ended. My relationship with my family was on the rocks. I moved out on my own. I got a puppy. I was told that I wouldn't be able to return to work. I wasn't driving, not to mention that I was bored out of my mind. And then things like why me started circulating in my head. What do I do now? Who am I? I literally hit rock bottom. Still kicking against all odds. Since I was unable to work, I obviously had a lot of time to do some thinking. My rehab team truly inspired me. At the end of the day, I learned firsthand that life is too short. Now we have to do a job that we love, not just a job that we like or helps get us to the weekend. I decided I wanted to be a therapist and not just a patient anymore. I wanted to give back and to help people just as everyone had done for me through my journey. I wanted to help a future Lindsay. With the help of my rehab team, we looked at different school options for me. Actually, that summer before I started school, I went to a neuropsychologist and they did a bunch of cognitive testing on me due to my brain injury. They strongly suggested that school was not a smart decision and that it would not be successful due to my brain injury and that I would likely fail. But I viewed this as yet another challenge that I had to overcome. So I applied to the OTA-PTA program at Conestoga College and started in fall 2017. I began school and I was so determined to succeed and prove them all wrong. With lots of help from my rehab team, I completed the 2-year program with tons of ups and downs. On top of my hectic school schedule, I still participated in weekly rehab. Now, by no means am I saying that it's been easy. It's been anything but rainbows, butterflies, and puppies. In fact, it's been the exact opposite. I've had to accept that I'm a different person physically and cognitively. Lindsay 2.0, I like to call it. I've had many physical and emotional challenges along my road to recovery, but reflecting back now, I made it. Against all odds, I made it. This is me walking with a limp. So why me? This was a big question for me. And then it hit me. Through this crazy road to recovery, I've learned my why. Prior to the accident, I was actually searching for this. Who am I? Why am I here? For example, I was actually in a network marketing company to make some extra money on the side. And I remember my friend asking me, why are you doing this? I thought about it and I didn't really have a really good answer for her. She said for her, it was her kids. But for me, I didn't have kids and I was nowhere close to that. But as humans, we are used to following social norms and expectations, which makes it difficult to answer these questions. We're told to go to school, and in college or university, you have to go to one and then find a good paying job. It's just what we do. We're going through the emotions of life, but sometimes it takes a traumatic experience. But now I'm not saying go and get in a horrific car accident like I was in. But things like losing a loved one or losing a job really make you stop and reflect on your life. I asked, why did this happen to me? I feel like I was a good person following all of the social norms, or following all the norms, and my life was in order. Through this, I have learned my why. It's to help people, give back, and start doing things that make Lindsay happy. I used to be a person who went with the flow, never made my own decisions, and I was a people pleaser. But through this, I've learned to be the best version of myself and to focus on Lindsay and what I want in my life. So mental health. Through my journey to recovery, I experienced a wild roller coaster ride of emotions. I didn't know why I made it and the other kids didn't. I got home only to find out the people in my life, their lives were all moving on, while mine just felt like it was at a great standstill. I felt like a burden to everyone, and depression really got the best of me. I wasn't sure what the future was going to look like or if I would be able to proceed as the person that I once was. But by taking into account how far I had come and the support system I had, I realized the benefits of talking to someone and them confirming my feelings and that I was having were reasonable. This showed me the value of a community, such as the Brain Association of Waterloo, and that we can't recover on our own and that we need to support one another and to utilize the available resources that we have to us. As I started to become more independent and began driving again, I began to face judgment from others. While I may have appeared okay on the outside, I still had limitations. This forced me to identify the importance of empathy and to stop assuming things of others and understanding the risk of judgment firsthand. I'm standing here today, or sitting on Zoom, constantly reflecting on how far I've come over the past 5 years. It's really made me realize how true the saying is, you don't know what you've got until it's gone. And I've learned not to take things for granted because you never know what's going to hit you next. So, this is from work. So, what's next? So, I started a social media account and a podcast called And Then It Hit Me. So, what I do on this is I interview survivors, caregivers, and medical professionals so we can get a well-rounded perspective of what recovery truly looks like from every angle. And I'm also doing it in hopes of creating a support network where we can help inspire, motivate, and educate one another and be there for one another. I'm in a new relationship, and we welcomed our son on March 27th, 2020, Leo. So it's been a lot of fun. And he is definitely truly a miracle, because the doctors also told me that having a baby was just not in the cards. So he is our little miracle baby. Thank you guys for your time.
Great. Well, thank you, Lindsay. Any questions? If you want to put them into the chat, then I'll be able to send them on to Lindsay. I had a couple of questions for you.
Yep.
You talked about a lot of your different rehab things that you did. Are there some that you found really helpful and others you went, nah, if I was to do that again, I wouldn't go down that path?
Probably in the moment, a lot of them. I remember physio when I was at the hospital being like, oh my God, this is the worst thing in the world.
Yeah.
But it definitely was helpful. But looking back now, maybe not the speech language pathologist. I don't think that I needed that as much as a lot of other people needed it. But everything else I definitely felt was of value.
And you talked about still doing some therapies. Which ones are you still continuing to do?
So I have massage therapy, physiotherapy, rehab support worker, my occupational therapist. We talk to one another occasionally. It's about every 2 weeks. The case manager still checks in about every 2 weeks. And then the social worker, who I talk to actually via Zoom every 2 or 3 weeks, depending on how I need her.
Okay. And your little son there, such a cutie. What did you have to do differently? And of course, this is your first child, so you wouldn't know what a normal pregnancy would be like. But was something that you did that you felt was something that a brain injured survivor who was pregnant would want to know?
I got a lot of help, that's for sure. I also did rehab while I was pregnant with Leo the entire time. That was super helpful too. And taking breaks too, and taking a step back, because at first, when Leo was first born, I definitely think that I went through a little bit of postpartum, and him crying and everything was just very, very overwhelming for me. So just taking a step back and having some Lindsay time and just reflecting and then going back to it. And that definitely seemed to help.
So setting up that support structure.
Yes. And talking to the social worker.
Yeah. Okay, good. Good. And a little bit more about your podcast.
Yeah.
Tell us who you've interviewed that some people would know on this chat.
Oh, I don't know if anybody would know any. I actually want to interview you, Linda.
No, I'm not.
But I interviewed
every sports people. Or like, where are you finding these people?
Through social media. I've also interviewed a few of my own rehab members. I interviewed my professor at Conestoga College because she's an occupational therapist as well as the head of the OTA PTA program. So that was kind of cool.
Okay.
And it's actually on hold right now just because Leo's a little bit more of a handful than I thought. But I am going to go back to it.
Yeah. Good. There's a little bit of a very serious question here, and it's around thinking more about death. Mm-hmm. Or are you afraid of not living your best life? Or talk to us a little bit about how you would communicate that sense of every day having to do your best and not going down the path of what might have happened and that sort of thing. How do you kind of keep those thoughts focused?
So for the longest time, that was a big thing in my head. It was, why me, why me, why me? And for me, the kids that passed away were 17 and 16 years old. And at the time I was 27. So in my head, I was like, how come I survived? I've lived for 27 years. I have 10 years on these kids and they passed away. It didn't make any sense to me. But now that I've had a lot of time to reflect and everything, I know that this is my reason. I figured out my reason why, like I said in the presentation. And I want to also leave I guess, a footprint on the earth before I leave, that if I've started and then it hit me too, so that if I can impact at least one person, then I've done my job, and my second chance at life is well worth it.
Right. So it's having that purpose, having
Yes.
that direction, having that sense that I'm here because there's still more that I can do.
Yeah, and I want to help people as best as I can. And like I said, another future Lindsay, I would love to be able to help someone like that.
Okay. Now, what about there's another question around physical injuries, and other people have more brain dysfunction. So physically, they're all mostly there, and with either mine or yours are very physical, plus the brain injury.
Yes.
And so, can you talk a little bit about maybe the cognitive part, or what did you have to do to overcome that? Sleeping, napping, and you talked a lot about sleeping when you're in rehab, but
I
what?
still.
Okay, so that's what I think
Yeah.
we're trying to get at. Yeah. So talk a little
Yeah. So I think it's taken me a little bit of time to realize my brain injury and the effects of it. So I've definitely got a lot more anxiety than I had before, a little bit of social anxiety. I'm also terrible with money. The thought of money, my credit card statement comes in and I basically hide it. It's gotten to be like out of control. It's bad. So I've been working with a social worker with that. Recalling things is a lot harder than it ever was before. Also, school, when I had to do school, learning, it took me a lot longer to do things. I actually had to create cue cards based on the lessons, and then I would review those cue cards every night before I'd go to bed, just so it's stuck in my brain, and I have to read it as well as physically look at it. So that was an adjustment. Not to mention I'm always tired, so I take lots of naps. I have a nap every day if I get time with Leo now, but
Okay.
normally every day I'd have to have a nap just to reset.
Right. So you talked a lot of strategies that you had to
I've learned
develop,
over time.
and you're still doing some of those then, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So another question's come in. What are you most proud of yourself, or what are you most proud of yourself since your accident? Besides
Well,
besides
talking to a lot of my rehab team that I have, and just learning the extent of my accident. Like, I look back at my pictures from my accident, and to me, it's not real. That's not me. You know what I mean? So I feel like how far I've come, and that I made the decision to not just sit back and feel sorry for myself, but I made the decision to participate in rehab and give it all that I could give it. And thankfully, I've gotten as far as I have gotten.
Great. One other question here about friends. So many times brain injury survivors lose their friends, and sometimes their family. And just wondered if you had a comment about that, and how do you find your new friends? Because we always want to develop those new friends. How did you deal with the loss of those people that you thought were your friends and or your family?
So I would have to say, for family, this was a big thing at the hospital. It was basically like World War III at the hospital, because I had to have a blood transfusion and my parents were against this. So it became a big war, and I was in the middle of the teeter-totter, as well as having to deal with everything else on top of things. So I was extremely stressed out, and I'd have one person come in and tell me this thing, and then another person come in and tell me that thing. So that put a lot of strain on my relationships with my family and my boyfriend at the time and his family as well. So that was very, very difficult. Friends, when I first got home, I feel like a lot of people think that you're at the hospital, you're recovering at the hospital, then you go into rehab, you have lots of visitors. I had lots of visitors at the hospital. Then I got home, and it's like people just think at the snap of a finger, well, Lindsay, why aren't you back to work? Why aren't you doing, like, why can't we go to the mall like we used to? Why can't we do all these things? And a lot of people, that didn't go through their heads. So I was at home most nights in the apartment by myself with my dog, and it was very isolating, definitely. So that was very hard too.
And how about now? How did you find new friends, and how do you stay connected with them?
I actually used an app called Bumble BFF to find friends in the area, and that's been successful. So just I'm straightforward at the very beginning is, well, sometimes that I can't do as many things as you guys can do. I can do things within limitations. And some of my friends too from prior, like I have a friend in London and she's a nurse, and my other friend there is a rec therapist. So both of them are very good when we go out. They're like, okay, sit down, you need a break.
Yes.
So it's good to have friends like that.
Friends that understand.
Because I'm not always,
yeah,
I'm aware, but I'm not always there to be like, oh yeah, maybe I should stop.
Right. What about memory issues? How do you deal with them? You talked about cue cards and learning, but you talked about memory. What do you do to help you with memory issues?
I've started putting a lot of reminders into my phone and setting alerts, and everything goes into my calendar for any events, any rehab, going out one night, that's all on my phone, and I have it remind me. I also have to try to, I look at it every night before I go to bed, so then I'm like, oh yeah, okay, I have physio tomorrow and I have massage. Okay, good. So that definitely helps out.
Okay, great. And what about emotions? Like, you seem like pretty even-keeled person. Do you see the swings in emotions, the happy, sad, crying, overthinking things?
Oh yeah, I'm I'm my own worst enemy, that's for sure. I still talk to a social worker, and I have my days, especially lately. The car accident was 5 years, November 3rd. And leading up to that date, for whatever reason, it's like my mind just knows that the date is coming, and it's so daunting that I just shut down. I can't do anything. I just cry I feel like for no reason.
Right.
But so I had to deal with that this year. That was big.
Yeah,
but this year I decided, since it was 5 years, that I wanted to celebrate. So I actually took a balloon and I wrote out all my negative thoughts for 2 weeks leading up to the car accident date, November 3rd. And I attached them to the balloon, and then I popped it as if like to let it go.
Perfect.
So I felt like that really, it helped.
Okay, Donna, we got
it's good to write it out.
We got to add that to our exercises with the other brain injury survivors. That's a good
There you go.
Okay, other questions that you might want, we haven't covered already, send them through right now. I'm going to shut off the recording in a few minutes if there's no other questions, and then we can bring everybody back on.
Just so you guys know too, I'm on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter under And Then It Hit Me. And if you'd like to share your story, if you're a survivor, caregiver, or a medical professional, I would love the opportunity to talk to you and share your story with everyone.
Okay, great. I'm going to go off record. Hang on.
Okay.